The Medici family ruled Florence, but not just with money or power. They ruled with feasts, spectacles so grand they made today's celebrity parties look like picnics. We are talking peacocks roasted and re-feathered, mountains of sugar sculpted into entire cities, and rivers of wine flowing for thousands. Their banquets were more than just meals, they were jaw-dropping displays of wealth, art, and political might designed to dazzle, intimidate, and utterly control their world. People feasted on dishes so rare, so shocking, you would think they were myths. These were events where the food was art, the entertainment was theater, and the guest list read like a who's who of Renaissance royalty and genius. Get ready, because what you are about to read will change how you think about dinner parties forever. These were not just meals, they were the ultimate power moves served on solid gold plates. Number 9. A private literary feast by Lorenzo the Magnificent. In the heart of Florence, away from the roaring crowds of carnival and the solemn halls of power, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Il Magnifico, created a different kind of feast. This was not a public display for the masses or a diplomatic show for visiting royalty. This was a gathering for his inner circle, a collection of the brightest minds, poets, philosophers, and artists who defined the Florentine Renaissance. These evenings held frequently at his various villas, perhaps at Careggi or Poggio a Caiano, were intellectual playgrounds disguised as dinner parties. The atmosphere was one of lively debate, philosophical inquiry, and artistic inspiration, all fueled by incredible food and copious wine. Lorenzo understood that true power lay not just in coin and sword, but in culture and intellect. He cultivated brilliance, and his banquets were designed to foster it. The guest list might include the philosopher Marsilio Ficino, whose Neoplatonic ideas profoundly influenced the age, or the poet Angelo Poliziano, whose verses flowed as smoothly as the Chianti on the table. Young Michelangelo might have been there, or the painter Sandro Botticelli, their minds buzzing with the ideas shared around the richly laden table. Historical accounts suggest these gatherings were less about sheer volume of food and more about exquisite quality and symbolic presentation. The setting itself was curated to inspire. Picture a room adorned not with gaudy gold, but with masterpieces of art. Frescoes by Botticelli or Ghirlandaio might have graced the walls, depicting classical scenes or allegories that sparked conversation. Sculptures, perhaps ancient Roman busts or early works by a budding artist, would be strategically placed, catching the flickering light from dozens of candles. The air would be filled with the scent of roasted meats, fragrant herbs, and the sweet perfume of imported spices. This music, often composed by Lorenzo himself or performed by his talented court musicians, would drift through the air, sometimes lively and sometimes contemplative, setting the mood for the intellectual exchange. The food, while not on the scale of a ducal wedding, was nonetheless a testament to Medici wealth and refined taste. Dishes would be prepared with an emphasis on fresh, local ingredients, but elevated by rare and exotic imports. There might be delicate roasted game birds like pheasants or quails, often stuffed with aromatic herbs and wild mushrooms gathered from the Tuscan hills. Fresh pasta, handmade, and perhaps tinted with saffron or spinach, would be served with rich sauces made from slow-cooked meats or seasonal vegetables. Fish, brought in fresh from the coast, would be prepared simply to highlight its natural flavors, or baked in pastry crusts, a common showstopper of the era. But the true artistry often lay in the more unusual presentation. There might be sugar sculptures, miniature allegorical scenes, or classical figures serving not just as dessert, but as conversation starters. Ornate, gilded silver platters, sometimes displaying the Medici coat of arms, would hold carefully arranged fruits, both local and imported. Think of figs, grapes, and peaches alongside rare citrus fruits like oranges and lemons, brought from the family's own vast estates. Wine flowed freely, of course. Lorenzo had vineyards producing some of the finest wines in Tuscany, and these would be served in beautiful Venetian glass goblets, often alongside spiced wines or hippocras, a sweet aromatic drink. Desserts were not just sweet, they were often symbolic. Marzipan confections shaped into mythological creatures or classical gods might be served, tying into the humanist discussions at the table. Candied fruits, especially exotic ones like dates or pomegranates, would offer a burst of intense flavor. Even the bread, while seemingly simple, would be of the finest quality, baked fresh, and served with fragrant olive oil and local cheeses. These feasts were not only about food and art, they were about fostering an environment where ideas could flourish, where new ways of thinking could be born. Lorenzo de' Medici used these gatherings to solidify his position, not just as a political leader, but as the undisputed patron of the arts and sciences. He engaged in the debates himself, often displaying a quick wit and a deep understanding of philosophy, Latin, and Greek. He was known for his impromptu poetry, sometimes composing verses on the spot, challenging his guests to respond in kind. The impact of these seemingly private gatherings was immense. The ideas discussed and refined at these tables eventually shaped the intellectual landscape of Europe. Artists received commissions, philosophers found patrons, and poets discovered new audiences. The very concept of the Renaissance man, someone deeply knowledgeable in various fields, was fostered in these environments. Lorenzo's feasts created a unique bridge between power, wealth, and profound intellectual pursuit, proving that the greatest extravagance could sometimes be found not in the sheer volume of gold, but in the richness of the minds gathered around a table. These dinners were a masterclass in soft power, demonstrating that the Medici influence extended far beyond the walls of any palace, directly into the minds and hearts of the greatest thinkers of their time. Number 8. The Inner of the Planets by Alessandro de' Medici. In the mid-1530s, Florence was transitioning. Alessandro de' Medici, the first Duke of Florence, ruled with a heavier hand than his ancestors. Yet, he still understood the power of spectacle, especially when it came to cementing his new ducal authority. One particular banquet, known as the Dinner of the Planets, stands out not just for its extravagance, but for its deeply symbolic and even unusual nature. This feast was held during his ducal reign, possibly around 1536 or 1537, a period when Alessandro was consolidating his power and attempting to legitimize his new status. This banquet was not just a meal, it was a cosmic allegory brought to life. The setting was likely a grand hall within the Palazzo Medici, or a newly decorated space transformed to represent the celestial spheres. Imagine a dimly lit room where light sources, perhaps hidden lamps or candles, were strategically placed to simulate stars. The ceiling might have been draped with dark fabric adorned with painted constellations, creating an illusion of an open night sky indoors. The entire experience was designed to immerse the guests in an astronomical fantasy, a subtle nod to the Duke's own perceived divinely ordained rule. The guest list for such an event would have been carefully chosen in key: Florentine nobles, visiting dignitaries, and perhaps some of Alessandro's trusted advisors and courtiers. These were individuals whose loyalty Alessandro sought to secure or impress. The atmosphere, while certainly opulent, might have carried a certain tension, given Alessandro's reputation for severity. Yet, the sheer novelty and artistic ambition of the feast would undoubtedly have captivated everyone present. The most striking aspect of the Dinner of the Planets was the way the food was served. Each course was meticulously planned to represent one of the known planets of the solar system, as understood in the Renaissance. The presentation was key, often involving elaborate stage machinery and theatrical reveals. For instance, a course representing the moon might have been composed of dishes that were silvery or white, perhaps delicately prepared fish, or dishes with a pale, ethereal quality. It might have been served on platters that resembled lunar craters or crescent shapes. Then came the sun, perhaps a course of rich, golden-hued dishes, perhaps roasted game birds with glistening, crisp skin, or a magnificent roast surrounded by bright yellow fruits. The presentation might have involved a slow reveal, as if the sun itself was rising. Each planet, from Mercury to Saturn, was given its own culinary interpretation, sometimes relating to its mythological associations or its perceived astrological influence. For example, Mars might have been represented by red meats, perhaps seasoned with fiery spices, served with a dramatic, almost martial flair. Venus, on the other hand, would inspire dishes that were delicate, beautiful, and perhaps sweet or aphrodisiacal, served with an elegant grace. The dishes themselves would have been culinary masterpieces prepared by the Duke's finest chefs. There would be elaborate timbali, multi-layered savory pies filled with various meats, cheeses, and vegetables, often decorated with intricate pastry designs. Exotic birds like peacocks or swans might have been prepared, roasted whole, and then meticulously refeathered to appear alive, a common display of opulence at the time. Wild boar, venison, and other game meats would be abundant, often accompanied by rich sauces made from imported spices like saffron, cinnamon, and cloves. Desserts would have been particularly spectacular, often featuring sugar sculptures that mimicked the planets themselves or constellations. These were not just sweet treats, but works of ephemeral art, meant to amaze and delight before they were consumed. Candied fruits, preserves, and delicate pastries would also be served, perhaps arranged to form celestial patterns on the serving tables. Wine flowed freely, naturally. The finest Tuscan wines, along with sweet dessert wines and spiced hippocras, would have been served in ornate goblets. The serving ritual itself would have been part of the show, with liveried servants moving with precision and dramatic timing, enhancing the celestial theme. Entertainment would have been woven into the very fabric of the feast. As each planet's course was presented, there might have been accompanying music, perhaps with specific instruments or melodies chosen to evoke the character of the planet. Small theatrical performances or recitations of poetry, perhaps astrological verses or mythological tales, would have occurred between courses, adding to the immersive experience. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated performance, a testament to Alessandro's desire to control not just his subjects, but their very perception of his reign. The Dinner of the Planets was a remarkable example of Renaissance courtly extravagance and the fusion of art, science, and gastronomy. It demonstrated the Medici's continued use of banquets as tools of power and propaganda, even under the new ducal regime. By associating himself with the ordered harmony of the cosmos, Alessandro sought to imbue his rule with a sense of inevitability and divine sanction. This feast was a dazzling, unforgettable experience for those who attended, solidifying Alessandro's image as a ruler capable of commanding not just earthly resources, but the very heavens themselves. Number 7, Wedding of Cosimo II and Maria Maddalena of Austria, 1608. The early 17th century saw the Medici dukes continue their tradition of extravagant celebrations, and the marriage of Cosimo II to Maria Maddalena of Austria in 1608 was no exception. This was a union of immense political importance, cementing alliances between the powerful Habsburg dynasty and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Such a marriage demanded a spectacle that reflected the prestige of both families. The festivities lasted for weeks, involving multiple banquets, public spectacles, and theatrical performances that dazzled all of Europe. The main wedding banquet, often held in the opulent Salone dei Cinquecento in the Palazzo Vecchio, or perhaps a specially constructed pavilion, was a feast for all senses. The setting would have been transformed into a lavish dreamscape. Tapestries depicting mythological scenes or Medici triumphs would have adorned the walls, complementing the frescoes by Vasari and other master artists. Chandeliers blazing with hundreds of candles would cast a golden glow over tables laden with silver and gold tableware. The air would be thick with the perfume of thousands of fresh flowers, arranged in elaborate centerpieces, along with the tantalizing aromas of countless dishes. The guest list was a who's who of European nobility, ambassadors, and high-ranking clergy. Each guest would be seated according to strict protocol reflecting their status. The Grand Duke and Duchess, seated on raised platforms, would be at the center of the spectacle, their every move a part of the grand performance. The sheer number of courses was staggering, sometimes reaching dozens, each presented with artistic flair. The food historians and contemporary accounts detail the incredible array of dishes. Roasted meats were paramount, entire oxen, wild boars, and venison, often spiced and glazed. Smaller game birds like pheasants, partridges, and peacocks would be prepared, frequently refeathered to create an illusion of life, often with a citrus or herb garnish. Fish, both freshwater and saltwater, would be served in elaborate aspics or baked in intricate pastry crusts, sculpted to resemble fantastical creatures or ships. A particular highlight would be the sugared sculptures or trionfi di tavola table triumphs. These were not merely desserts, but monumental works of art crafted from sugar, marzipan, and other edible materials. Imagine entire allegorical scenes, miniature palaces, or mythical beasts, all meticulously created and often towering over the tables. These acted as the grand centerpieces, only to be admired before eventually being broken down and consumed. The presentation was as important as the food itself. Dishes would arrive on magnificent platters, carried by liveried servants, sometimes accompanied by music or fanfares. Courses might be themed, with an entire sequence of dishes dedicated to a specific mythological story or virtue. The table settings themselves were works of art, with intricate embroideries on the tablecloths, delicate Venetian glass goblets, and gleaming silverware engraved with the Medici crest. Wine flowed like water, of course. The finest Tuscan wines, along with imported vintages and sweet, spiced hippocras, would be served constantly. But beyond the main banquet hall, the celebrations extended to the public. Huge quantities of food were often prepared for the Florentine populace, distributed in designated squares. Large public fountains would often be made to spout wine instead of water, a symbol of the Grand Duke's boundless generosity and prosperity. The entertainment during the feast was spectacular and interwoven with the dining. Between courses, there would be elaborate intermezzi shorts, allegorical musical and theatrical performances. These were precursors to opera, featuring magnificent costumes, elaborate stage machinery, and dazzling special effects. Imagine actors flying through the air on wire, smoke, and mist filling the hall, or hidden contraptions revealing surprising scenes. Singers would perform madrigals, and musicians would play lutes, harpsichords, and various wind instruments. There might be mock battles, equestrian ballets, or even acrobatic displays. The sheer scale of these performances was designed to overwhelm and impress. Outside the banquet hall, the festivities continued for days. There were jousts and tournaments in the Piazza Santa Croce, elaborate street parades featuring triumphal chariots and costumed participants, and magnificent fireworks displays over the Arno River at night. Each event was meticulously planned to showcase Medici power, wealth, and artistic patronage. The wedding of Cosimo II and Maria Maddalena was a prime example of the Medici's continued mastery of propaganda through spectacle. It was a reaffirmation of their dynastic power, their connections to the most powerful families in Europe, and their unwavering commitment to cultural preeminence. The memory of such an event would linger for generations, spoken of in hushed tones as a pinnacle of Florentine magnificence. It showed that even into the 17th century, the Medici knew how to throw a party that would leave an indelible mark on history. Number 6. Banquet for King Christian IV of Denmark, 1600. The year 1600 was a pivotal moment for Ferdinando I of Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany. He was eager to demonstrate Florence's continued status as a major European power and cultural hub. A significant opportunity arose with the visit of King Christian IV of Denmark, a powerful Protestant monarch. Ferdinando, a shrewd diplomat and a lover of spectacle, knew that a lavish feast was the perfect tool to impress his royal guest and solidify political ties. This banquet was designed not just to feed a king, but to overwhelm him with Florentine artistry, wealth, and taste. The setting for this grand reception was likely the Palazzo Pitti, a colossal palace that Ferdinando had expanded and lavishly decorated. The specific dining hall would have been transformed for the occasion, probably the Salone de Cinquecento or a similarly grand space. The hall would be adorned with an unprecedented display of Medici art, priceless tapestries, ancient Roman sculptures, and master paintings from the ducal collection. Gilded candelabras, hundreds of them, would bathe the room in a warm, shimmering light, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the gold and silver of the tableware. The air would be filled with the intoxicating aroma of roasting meats, exotic spices, and fragrant flowers. The guest list was a mix of the highest Florentine nobility, ambassadors from various European courts, and the King of Denmark's entourage. Every detail, from the seating arrangements to the serving protocol, would have been meticulously planned to showcase the Grand Duke's impeccable organization and boundless resources. King Christian, a monarch from a different cultural background, would have been particularly susceptible to the dazzling display of Mediterranean luxury and artistry. The food served was a testament to the Medici's culinary ambition and their access to global markets. Imagine a feast where rare and exotic ingredients were commonplace. Roasted peacocks, swans, and even ostriches, carefully prepared and then refeathered to appear alive, would have been central features. These birds were not just food, they were spectacular centerpieces. Various game meats, including wild boar, venison, and hare, would be presented alongside enormous cuts of beef and lamb. All would be seasoned with a vast array of spices, from common pepper and salt to more expensive cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and saffron, sourced from the Far East. Fish dishes were equally elaborate. Giant pike, carp, and even saltwater fish transported fresh from the coast would be baked in intricate pastry cases, often shaped like fantastical sea creatures. Aspics, shimmering jellies filled with savory ingredients, would be molded into complex architectural forms or allegorical figures. The sheer variety of preparations was designed to astonish. But the real showstoppers were the triumphi di tavola, the table triumphs. These were immense sugar sculptures, often several feet tall, depicting mythological scenes, architectural marvels, or even the coats of arms of both the Medici and Danish royal families. One might have seen a sugar Neptune rising from a sea of blue jelly, or a miniature Florentine skyline crafted from marzipan and gilded sugar. These were works of temporary art, created by master confectioners and chefs, meant to be admired before they were eventually broken apart and consumed. Alongside these, there would be countless smaller dishes, delicate pastries, candied fruits, marzipan confections shaped into animals or flowers, and a dizzying array of cheeses and breads. Wine flowed continuously from ornate fountains, often spouting fine Tuscan vintages or sweet spiced hippocras. Servers dressed in rich livery would move with choreographed precision, presenting dishes on solid gold or silver platters, sometimes accompanied by a fanfare of trumpets. The entertainment was integrated seamlessly into the banquet. Between courses, there would be short, dazzling performances, often known as intermezzi. These would feature elaborate stage machinery, enabling actors to fly, trapdoors to reveal surprising scenes, and artificial smoke and mist to create magical effects. Singers, accompanied by a full orchestra of lutes, viols, and wind instruments, would perform madrigals and early operatic pieces. The themes would often be mythological or allegorical, subtly praising the power and wisdom of the host. There might be acrobats performing astounding feats, or masked dancers moving gracefully across the floor. Outside the main banquet, the celebrations for King Christian IV included numerous other spectacles. There were grand equestrian ballets in the Pitti Palace courtyard, with dozens of elaborately dressed horses and riders performing intricate maneuvers. Mock naval battles were staged on the Arno River, complete with miniature galleys and fireworks. Triumphal street processions featuring allegorical floats and costumed performers paraded through the city, drawing immense crowds. The night sky over Florence was often illuminated by dazzling fireworks displays, a relatively new art form at the time, which were always a highlight. This banquet for King Christian IV was more than just a meal. It was a carefully orchestrated diplomatic event, a performance of power and sophistication. Ferdinando I used it to showcase Florence's wealth, artistic genius, and political significance. For King Christian, it was an unforgettable experience, a glimpse into the height of Italian Renaissance court culture. The memory of such opulence would certainly have lingered, influencing his perceptions of Florentine power and enhancing the Medici's reputation across the continent. It proved that even as the Renaissance reached its later stages, the Medici continued to perfect the art of the extravagant feast as a tool of statecraft. Number 5. Pope Leo X's visit to Florence, 1515. When Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X in 1513, It was a moment of immense triumph for the Medici family. It marked the pinnacle of their ascent, transforming them from powerful bankers into the rulers of the Catholic Church. 2 years later, in 1515, Pope Leo X made a triumphant visit to his hometown of Florence, and the city, under the guidance of his cousin Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici the Younger, spared no expense in welcoming its most illustrious son. This was not just a visit, it was a coronation parade, a religious pilgrimage, and a political statement all rolled into one, culminating in banquets that echoed ancient Roman triumphs. The entire city of Florence was transformed for the occasion. Temporary triumphal arches, some designed by artists like Andrea del Sarto, were erected along the route the Pope would take. Facades of buildings were painted with elaborate frescoes and allegorical scenes. The streets were strewn with flowers and fragrant herbs. The atmosphere was one of delirious celebration, a joyous outpouring of civic pride and deference to the all-powerful Medici. Every citizen who could afford it was expected to contribute to the decoration and festivities. The main banquet for Pope Leo X would have taken place in one of the grandest halls available, perhaps the Palazzo Medici itself, or especially decorated space within the Palazzo Vecchio. The room would be draped in the finest silks and tapestries, emblazoned with the Medici coat of arms and the papal tiara and keys. Tables would groan under the weight of gold and silver platters, intricately worked and gleaming. Chandeliers holding countless candles would illuminate the scene, casting a warm, celebratory glow. The air would be filled with the harmonious sounds of choirs and musicians, playing instruments from lutes to trumpets, and the intoxicating aroma of rare spices and roasted meats. The guest list was unparalleled. It included the Pope himself, surrounded by his cardinals and curia, alongside the highest Florentine nobility, ambassadors from every major European court, and the city's leading intellectuals and artists. Every seat at the table was a reflection of power and influence, meticulously arranged to demonstrate the Medici's extensive network of connections. The food was designed to impress a pontiff who was famously fond of luxury and fine dining. Contemporary accounts speak of the sheer volume and variety. Roasted game meats were served in abundance: wild boars, deer, and countless birds, from plump capons to delicate quails. Many dishes involved unusual preparations. A peacock might be roasted whole and then refeathered with its brilliant plumage, its beak gilded, serving as a magnificent centerpiece before it was carved. Swans, pheasants, and even exotic birds from distant lands would grace the tables, their presentation as important as their taste. Fish, especially important for days of abstinence, would be transformed into culinary art. Giant fish baked in pastry cases, shaped like ships or castles, would be revealed with dramatic flair. Delicate seafood dishes, prepared with saffron and imported spices, would offer a counterpoint to the heavier meats. There were also elaborate trionfi di tavola, or table triumphs, massive sugar sculptures depicting allegorical scenes or classical figures. These edible artworks were often several feet tall, showing mythological scenes or tributes to the Pope, only to be marveled at before being broken down and shared. Vegetables and fruits, both local and imported, would be served in artistic arrangements. Imagine pyramids of fresh peaches, figs, and grapes, alongside rare citrus fruits like oranges and lemons brought from the Medici's own estates. Cheeses from various regions and countless types of fine bread would also be readily available. Wine flowed in torrents. The finest Tuscan wines, particularly Chianti, would be accompanied by sweet dessert wines and spiced hippocras. The public fountains across the city were said to spout wine for the common people, a symbol of the Medici's largesse. Entertainment was a constant feature of the banquet. Musicians played during the meal, often performing compositions created specifically for the occasion. Singers, including castrati, would perform madrigals and motets. Between courses, there would be elaborate intermezzi or theatrical interludes. These were short, allegorical plays with incredible special effects, using complex stage machinery to create flying figures, moving scenery, and dazzling illusions. Poets would recite verses in praise of the Pope and the Medici family, and skilled acrobats or dancers would entertain the guests. The festivities extended beyond the banquet hall. There were public games, jousts, and mock battles, often staged in the Piazza Santa Croce or other large squares. The Arno River itself became a stage for mock naval battles, complete with miniature ships and fireworks. The sheer amount of resources poured into this single visit was astronomical, bankrupting many Florentine families who were expected to contribute. Pope Leo X's visit and the feasts that accompanied it were a masterful display of Medici power and an enduring symbol of their golden age. It showcased their wealth, their artistic patronage, and their unmatched ability to stage a spectacle that blurred the lines between religious devotion, political propaganda, and pure entertainment. The memory of this visit, and the opulence of its banquets, would be spoken of for generations, cementing the Medici's place at the pinnacle of European society. It was a feast that literally celebrated their family sitting on the throne of St. Peter, a truly unparalleled achievement. Number 4, Carnival Feast under Lorenzo, the Magnificent, e.g. 1480s. This carnival in Renaissance Florence was not just a festival, it was a temporary reversal of the social order, a period of unrestrained revelry before the solemnity of Lent. Under Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Il Magnifico, Carnival reached an unprecedented level of artistic and popular spectacle. While not a single private banquet, the entire Carnival period, particularly in the 1480s, was characterized by a series of public feasts, elaborate street processions, and banquets for the elite, all orchestrated by Lorenzo to maintain civic harmony and demonstrate Medici generosity. Lorenzo understood the importance of entertaining the populace. He used Carnival as a tool of political and social control, allowing people to let loose in a controlled environment, fostering a sense of shared identity and loyalty to the Medici family. The city transformed into a giant stage. The streets were adorned with banners, garlands, and temporary structures. Masked figures roamed everywhere, music filled the air, and the scent of roasting meats mingled with sweet pastries. The public feasts were a central part of the carnival. Large quantities of food would be prepared and distributed in the main piazzas, like Piazza della Signoria or Piazza Santa Croce. Imagine long tables laden with roasted meats, particularly pork and beef, baked breads, and large wheels of cheese. Wine flowed freely, often from public fountains temporarily repurposed to dispense it. The emphasis here was on quantity and communal sharing, creating a sense of abundance and goodwill among the Florentine citizens. These were feasts for the people, designed to reinforce the image of the Medici as benevolent rulers. For Lorenzo's inner circle and the elite, the banquets were more refined, often taking place in the Palazzo Medici or his various villas. These were highly curated affairs, blending exquisite cuisine with intellectual discourse and artistic performance. The dining halls would be lavishly decorated, perhaps with allegorical tapestries or recent Medici art commissions. Silver and gold platters would gleam under the light of hundreds of candles. The air would be filled with the sounds of court musicians playing lively dance tunes or more contemplative madrigals. The food at these elite banquets reflected the Medici's refined tastes and access to rare ingredients. Roasted game birds like pheasants, partridges, and quails would be served, often stuffed with fragrant herbs and exotic spices like saffron, cinnamon, and cloves. Various cuts of meat, including tender veal and succulent pork, would be prepared with rich sauces. Fish, both from the Arno River and the nearby coast, would be baked in intricate pastry cases or served in delicate aspic molds. A particular highlight would have been the elaborate Trionfi di Tavola grand sugar sculptures that were both edible and highly symbolic. These might depict scenes from classical mythology, allegories of Florentine virtues, or whimsical figures related to the carnival theme. These works of art were meant to dazzle the eye and spark conversation before they were eventually consumed. Marzipan confections, candied fruits, and a variety of pastries would also be served, often shaped into intricate designs. The wine, of course, was abundant, with the finest Tuscan vintages flowing from elegant decanters. Sweet, spiced wines like Hippocras were popular, as were imported wines from other regions. Serving protocols would be precise, with liveried servants moving with practiced ease, presenting dishes on ornate platters. The entertainment during carnival feasts was a spectacle in itself. Lorenzo was a patron of the arts, and he commissioned the finest artists and poets to create songs, plays, and allegorical pageants. The famous Canti Carnascialeschi Carnival songs written by Lorenzo himself or by poets in his circle would be performed. These songs often had double meanings, sometimes a bit bawdy, and would be sung by groups of masked revelers as they paraded through the streets on elaborately decorated chariots. These chariots, known as triumphi, were designed by leading artists and would depict mythological scenes or allegories, stopping at various points for performances and speeches. Masked balls were common, with the elite mingling and dancing. Mock battles, jousts, and equestrian displays would entertain both the nobility and the common people in the city squares. Fireworks, while still a relatively new art form, would light up the night sky, adding to the sense of wonder and excitement. The entire period was a carefully choreographed symphony of revelry where art, music, and food combined to create an unforgettable experience. Lorenzo de' Medici's carnival feasts were a masterclass in soft power. By providing both lavish public entertainment and refined private banquets, he solidified his position as the city's benevolent leader, fostering a sense of unity and loyalty. He transformed a traditional festival into a powerful political statement, demonstrating his wealth, his artistic patronage, and his deep connection to the Florentine people. The memory of these carnival feasts under Il Magnifico lingered for generations, contributing to his legendary status as the quintessential Renaissance prince. They showed how the Medici could use food and festivity to bind a city to their will. Number 3. Wedding of Cosimo, the first de' Medici, and Eleonora di Toledo, 1539. The wedding of Cosimo, the first de' Medici, and Eleonora di Toledo in 1539 was not just a marriage, it was a political earthquake. Cosimo had just become the Duke of Florence, and he desperately needed to legitimize his new rule and establish the Medici as true royalty. Marrying Eleonora, the daughter of the powerful Viceroy of Naples, Don Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, was a brilliant strategic move. The wedding celebrations were thus designed to be an overwhelming display of ducal power, wealth, and sophisticated taste, signaling to both Florentines and foreign powers that the Medici had arrived on the grand European stage. The celebrations lasted for weeks, involving a series of meticulously planned events, each more extravagant than the last. The main wedding banquet was likely held in the newly redecorated Salone de Cinquecento in the Palazzo Vecchio, a space that Cosimo was transforming into a symbol of his ducal authority. The hall would have been sumptuously adorned with the finest tapestries depicting classical myths and Medici triumphs shimmering under the light of countless candles in elaborate gilded chandeliers. The air would have been a rich tapestry of scents, exotic flowers, roasted meats, and rare spices. Gold and silver platters, intricately engraved with the Medici and Toledo coats of arms, would have covered the tables, gleaming under the light. The guest list was a parade of European dignitaries, ambassadors, leading Florentine families, and the most influential figures of the Tuscan court. Cosimo and Eleonora, seated on a raised dais, would preside over the spectacle, their every gesture a statement of their newfound regal status. The atmosphere was one of calculated awe, designed to leave an indelible impression on everyone present. The food was a testament to the immense resources at Cosimo's disposal. Contemporary accounts describe a staggering array of dishes. Roasted meats were presented in abundance, entire oxen, wild boars, and countless game birds. Peacocks and swans were prepared, and then meticulously refeathered with their dazzling plumage, often with gilded beaks and claws, to appear as if alive on the table, serving as magnificent edible centerpieces. These spectacular birds were surrounded by an array of smaller, roasted fowl, from pheasants to quails, often stuffed with aromatic herbs and rich fillings. Fish, both from the sea and freshwater, was also a highlight. Enormous fish would be baked in intricate pastry crusts, shaped like mythological creatures or architectural marvels. Delicate seafood dishes, often flavored with saffron and other expensive spices, would be served in individual portions, showcasing the chef's artistry. The presentation was key dishes were often arranged allegorically or symmetrically, creating visually stunning edible landscapes. The trionfi di tavola, or table triumphs, were perhaps the most remarkable elements. These were not just desserts, but monumental sugar sculptures, sometimes several feet tall, depicting complex allegorical scenes, architectural wonders, or classical figures. Imagine a sugar fountain flowing with syrup, or a miniature garden complete with marzipan trees and edible flowers. These were created by master confectioners and artists, meant to be admired for their beauty and craftsmanship before they were eventually broken down and consumed. Alongside these there would be an array of candied fruits, marzipan confections, and delicate pastries, often shaped into intricate designs. Wine flowed ceaselessly, with the finest Tuscan vintages served in Venetian glass goblets. Sweet, spiced wines like Hippocras were also popular, often served from ornate decanters. For the Florentine populace, large quantities of food and wine were distributed in the city squares, and public fountains were famously made to spout wine, creating a widespread sense of communal celebration and generosity on the part of the new duke. The entertainment at the banquet was woven into the dining experience. Between courses, there were elaborate intermezzi, short, allegorical, musical, and theatrical performances that were precursors to opera. These featured magnificent costumes, stunning stage machinery that allowed actors to fly, or scenery to transform, and dazzling special effects. Singers, accompanied by full orchestras of lutes, viols, and wind instruments, would perform madrigals and dramatic scenes. Poets would recite verses in praise of the Duke and Duchess, and there would be skilled acrobats and dancers. Beyond the banquet hall, the wedding celebrations continued for days. There were grand jousts and tournaments in the Piazza Santa Croce, elaborate street pageants featuring triumphal chariots and costumed participants, and mock naval battles staged on the Arno River. The nights were illuminated by spectacular fireworks displays, a relatively new and exciting art form which dazzled the crowds and provided a fitting end to each day's festivities. The wedding of Cosimo I and Eleonora di Toledo was a pivotal moment in Medici history. The feasts and spectacles accompanying it were a deliberate and highly effective assertion of Cosimo's ducal authority. They showcased his immense wealth, his refined taste, and his unwavering commitment to establishing Florence as a leading center of art and culture. For Europe, it was a clear signal that the Medici were now a legitimate royal house, capable of hosting celebrations on par with the most powerful monarchies. The sheer scale and artistry of these feasts set a new standard for ducal magnificence, leaving a lasting legacy of extravagance and power. Number 2, Wedding of Francesco I of Medici and Joanna of Austria, 1565. The year 1565 marked another defining moment for the Medici dynasty, the marriage of Grand Duke Francesco, the first de' Medici, to Joanna of Austria, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I. This union was designed to cement the Medici's position among the ruling houses of Europe and elevate their status further. The celebrations that accompanied this wedding were legendary, surpassing even previous Medici spectacles in their complexity, artistry, and sheer scale. The entire city of Florence became a stage for a multi-day extravaganza, culminating in banquets that blurred the lines between culinary art, theatrical performance, and political statement. The Florentine government, under Cosimo I, Francesco's father, who was still actively involved, spared no expense. The city was adorned with an array of temporary structures and decorations designed by the finest artists of the day, including Giorgio Vasari. Triumphal arches, allegorical statues, and elaborate frescoes transformed the streets into an open-air museum, all celebrating the Medici and their imperial alliance. The atmosphere was one of joyous anticipation, civic pride, and overwhelming grandeur. The main wedding banquet, a highlight of the prolonged festivities, was likely held in the Salone de Cinquecento in the Palazzo Vecchio, which was by now fully adorned with Vasari's monumental frescoes. The hall would have been transformed into a shimmering dreamscape. Imagine hundreds of gilded candelabras casting a golden glow over tables laden with solid gold and silver tableware, intricately crafted and gleaming under the light. The air would be heavy with the scent of thousands of fresh flowers, arranged in magnificent centerpieces, mingling with the tantalizing aromas of countless dishes. Rich tapestries depicting mythological scenes and Medici triumphs would cover the walls, adding to the opulent atmosphere. The guest list was truly imperial, featuring ambassadors from across Europe, princes, dukes, and the highest nobility from both Italy and Austria. Grand Duke Cosimo I and the newlyweds Francesco and Joanna would be seated on a magnificent dais, observing the meticulous choreography of the feast. Every aspect, from the procession of dishes to the seating arrangements, was a carefully orchestrated performance of power and prestige. The food served was an unprecedented display of culinary artistry and lavish abundance. Roasted meats were presented on an epic scale: whole oxen, wild boars, and vast quantities of game. Peacocks and swans were prepared, then meticulously refeathered with their brilliant plumage, their beaks gilded, to appear as if alive, often mounted on elaborate stands, serving as edible sculptures. These were surrounded by a bewildering array of smaller birds like pheasants, partridges, and quails, often stuffed with fragrant herbs and exotic spices. Fish, both from the sea and freshwater, was equally spectacular. Enormous fish would be baked whole in intricate pastry cases, often shaped like fantastical creatures or ships in full sail. Delicate seafood dishes, flavored with saffron, ginger, and other expensive imported spices, would be served in exquisite individual portions. The presentation of each dish was as important as its taste plates were often arranged in symmetrical patterns or allegorical designs, creating stunning visual displays. The Trionfi di Tavola, or table triumphs, reached new heights of complexity and artistry. These were colossal sugar sculptures, some several feet high, depicting elaborate mythological scenes, miniature palaces, or allegories celebrating the union of the Medici and Habsburg houses. Imagine a sugar Mount Parnassus, complete with edible gods and muses, or a sugar ship navigating a sea of blue jelly. These works of ephemeral art were designed to awe and amaze, before they were eventually broken apart and consumed. Candied fruits, marzipan confections, shaped into animals and flowers, and a dizzying array of pastries and sweet dishes completed the culinary spectacle. The wine flowed without cease, with the finest Tuscan vintages served in delicate Venetian glass goblets. Sweet, spiced wines like Hippocras were particularly popular, often served from ornate silver fountains. For the Florentine populace, massive quantities of food and wine were distributed in the city squares, and public fountains were famously made to spout wine, creating a widespread sense of communal celebration and reinforcing the Medici's image as generous rulers. The entertainment during the banquet was seamlessly integrated. Between courses, there were elaborate intermezzi, short, allegorical, musical, and theatrical performances that were groundbreaking precursors to opera. These featured incredible stage machinery, allowing actors to fly through the air on wires, scenery to transform magically, and smoke and mist to create stunning atmospheric effects. Singers, accompanied by full orchestras of lutes, viols, trumpets, and harpsichords, performed intricate madrigals and dramatic scenes. Poets recited verses praising the newlyweds and their powerful families, and skilled dancers and acrobats provided further amusement. Beyond the main banquet, the wedding celebrations continued for days, even weeks. There were grand jousts and tournaments in the Piazza Santa Croce, featuring elaborately dressed knights and horses. Spectacular street pageants involved dozens of triumphal chariots designed by famous artists, carrying costume performers who enacted mythological or allegorical scenes as they paraded through the city. Mock naval battles were staged on the Arno River, complete with miniature galleys and dazzling fireworks. Each night, the skies over Florence were illuminated by magnificent fireworks displays, a relatively new and exciting art form, providing a grand finale to the day's festivities. The wedding of Francesco I and Joanna of Austria was a defining moment for the Medici. The feasts and spectacles were an unparalleled demonstration of their wealth, their artistic patronage, and their successful integration into the highest echelons of European royalty. It was a clear message to the world that the Grand Duchy of Tuscany was a powerful and sophisticated state, capable of hosting events on par with the most ancient monarchies. The sheer scale and artistry of these celebrations cemented the Medici's reputation for magnificence, a legacy that would echo through the centuries. Number 1. Wedding of Ferdinando I de' Medici and Cristina of Lorraine, 1589. The marriage of Grand Duke Ferdinando I de' Medici to Cristina of Lorraine in 1589 stands as perhaps the most extravagant and artistically ambitious feast in Medici history. Ferdinando, a former cardinal who had renounced his ecclesiastical vows to become Grand Duke, understood better than anyone the power of spectacle to project authority and cement alliances. This wedding was a monumental event designed to showcase the full might, wealth, and artistic genius of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany to all of Europe. The celebrations lasted for weeks, involving a series of meticulously choreographed banquets, street pageants, and theatrical performances that set a new standard for courtly entertainment. The entire city of Florence was transformed into a dazzling stage for the arrival of Cristina and the subsequent festivities. Elaborate, temporary structures were erected, triumphal arches, painted with allegorical scenes, and Medici symbolism adorned the main thoroughfares. Statues, fountains, and decorative frescoes covered buildings, all designed by the leading artists of the day, including Bernardo Buontalenti, the genius behind many of the mechanical wonders. The atmosphere in the city was one of frenzied excitement and anticipation, as citizens and foreign dignitaries alike prepared for an unparalleled display of Renaissance magnificence. The main wedding banquet, the centerpiece of the celebrations, was held in the vast Salone de Cinquecento in the Palazzo Vecchio, a space that had been continuously refined and decorated to serve as the ultimate symbol of ducal power. The hall was a blaze of gold and silver, with hundreds of gilded candelabras holding countless flickering candles illuminating the scene. The air was thick with the perfumes of exotic flowers, painstakingly arranged in towering centerpieces, mingling with the intoxicating aromas of countless dishes. The tables groaned under the weight of solid gold and silver platters, intricately worked and gleaming, each piece a testament to the Medici's boundless wealth. The guest list was a who's who of European royalty, including ambassadors from every major court, powerful nobles from across Italy, and the highest echelons of the Florentine aristocracy. Ferdinando and Cristina, seated on a magnificent elevated dais, presided over the spectacle, their every gesture a carefully choreographed part of the grand performance. The meticulous organization and boundless resources, evident in every detail, were designed to leave an indelible impression on all attendees, a clear message of Medici supremacy. The food served was an unprecedented display of culinary artistry and staggering abundance. Roasted meats were presented on an epic scale: entire oxen, wild boars, and vast quantities of game birds. The peacocks and swans were prepared, then meticulously refeathered with their brilliant plumage, their beaks gilded to appear as if alive, often mounted on elaborate stands, serving as magnificent edible centerpieces. These were surrounded by a bewildering array of smaller birds like pheasants, partridges, and quails, often stuffed with aromatic herbs and exotic spices imported from the Far East. Fish, both from the sea and freshwater, was equally spectacular. Enormous fish would be baked whole in intricate pastry cases, often shaped like fantastical sea creatures or ships in full sail, sometimes revealing surprising inner layers of different colored foods. Delicate seafood dishes, flavored with saffron, ginger, and other expensive spices, would be served in exquisite individual portions, showcasing the chef's artistry. The presentation of each dish was paramount. Plates were often arranged in symmetrical patterns or allegorical designs, creating stunning visual displays that blurred the line between food and fine art. The trionfi di tavola, or table triumphs, reached their absolute zenith at this wedding. These were colossal sugar sculptures, some several feet high, depicting elaborate mythological scenes, miniature palaces, or allegories celebrating the union of the Medici and Lorraine houses. Imagine a sugar garden of the Hesperides, complete with edible golden apples and marzipan trees, or a massive sugar fountain of Neptune spouting real water or wine. These works of ephemeral art were masterpieces of confectionery and sculpture designed to awe and amaze before they were eventually broken apart and consumed. Candied fruits, marzipan confections shaped into animals and flowers, and a dizzying array of pastries and sweet dishes completed the culinary spectacle. Wine flowed without cease, with the finest Tuscan vintages served in delicate Venetian glass goblets. Sweet, spiced wines like Hippocras were particularly popular, often served from ornate silver fountains that continuously dispensed wine. For the Florentine populace, massive quantities of food and wine were distributed in the city squares, and public fountains across the city famously spouted wine for days, creating a widespread sense of communal celebration and reinforcing the Medici's image as benevolent, endlessly generous rulers. The entertainment during the banquet was not merely interspersed, but organically woven into the dining experience. The most famous example of this was the performance of the intermezzi for the play La Pellegrina, which became legendary. These were short, allegorical, musical, and theatrical performances that took place between the acts of a comedy. They featured unprecedented levels of spectacle, including incredible stage machinery designed by Buontalenti, allowing actors to fly through the air on wires, scenery to transform magically, and smoke, mist, and fire to create stunning atmospheric effects. Singers, accompanied by full orchestras of lutes, viols, trumpets, and the newly invented harpsichord, performed intricate madrigals and dramatic operatic scenes. Poets recited verses praising the newlyweds and their powerful families, and skilled dancers and acrobats provided further amusement. The intermezzi of La Pellegrina were so revolutionary that they are often considered a pivotal moment in the development of opera itself. Beyond the main banquet, the wedding celebrations continued for weeks, including grandiose tournaments in the Piazza Santa Croce, featuring elaborately dressed knights and horses. Spectacular street pageants involved dozens of triumphal chariots designed by famous artists, carrying costume performers who enacted mythological or allegorical scenes as they paraded through the city. Mock naval battles were staged on the Arno River, complete with miniature galleys and dazzling fireworks. Each night, the skies over Florence were illuminated by magnificent fireworks displays, often choreographed to music, providing a grand and explosive finale to the day's festivities. The wedding of Ferdinando I and Cristina of Lorraine was the absolute pinnacle of Medici extravagance and artistic patronage. The feasts and spectacles were an unparalleled demonstration of their immense wealth, their sophisticated artistic taste, and their successful integration into the highest echelons of European royalty. It was a clear and unmistakable message to the world that the Grand Duchy of Tuscany was a powerful, refined, and culturally superior state, capable of hosting events on par with the most ancient and powerful monarchies. The sheer scale and artistry of these celebrations cemented the Medici's reputation for magnificence, a legacy that would echo through the centuries, defining the very essence of Renaissance courtly life.